Going live. And this Hangout on air, it's live. Happy Bloomsday, everybody. If you don't know about Bloomsday, I don't really know that much about it except Bloom. James Joyce and Ulysses, one of the most impenetrable books. They celebrate his life in Dublin and other places on the 16th. No, we're not celebrating Bloom. We're not celebrating Cecil. He's on assignment, I think, with one of the true greats, Bob Henry. So you get me and you get some other greats. Between Two Mats. This is another edition of Between Two Mats.
Except we're a lot more livelier than Ferns.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We are a lot. I mean, it's a low bar, but Matt Waldman and Matt, you had an alternative name for this show.
I did, didn't I? And I don't remember what it is.
It was two men and a 3 minute baby.
Yeah, or Two Cats and a Dog. That was what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's the dog. Bow wow wow yippee yo yippee yay. Matt Harm's definitely in the hey else. What's up?
Oh well, it's a pleasure to be here, sitting through Waldman's wacky introduction.
Oh, see, that's what you do. You just
that's what like cats do to dogs, man.
Exactly.
We just smack them down.
That was like the Gong Show. He's gonna try. We didn't even get to hear. He was gonna say something young and witty, but he's back. No, so let that be a lesson to you, whippersnapper.
Well, I'm off to a rough start here.
It's good. It's the microphone, and I like how the microphone's prominent. We're all about microphones. We're all about our microphones here. We're all about football, and it's June. OTA's winding up. Dr. Gene also not able to be with us tonight, so we'll talk about some things like Rashad Perryman. He's written about that on the site, and a few other things. I want to start first with a couple of things from the news this week. And before I do that, actually, I have to give you a word from our sponsor. We have 3 words from our sponsor tonight, Matt Waldman, so it's your job to help me remember that. Right. Today's podcast, tonight's live show, actually, brought to you by Reality Sports Online, a powerful fantasy platform that lets you build and manage your fantasy team like a real-life GM. The platform features the revolutionary free agency auction room, has tons of other cool features like a rookie draft, franchise tags, automated contract and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. Visiting realitysportsonline.com today and using the promo code Audible gets you 10% off the platform fee. And again, I'll mention that Matt Waldman has been running a RSP Writers League. It includes many illustrious types. And it's the next level. Caps, contracts, penalties if you cut players before the contract is up, guaranteed money, and so on. Lots of more dimensions to decision making. And we always like more dimensions to decision making. We always like more dimensions to stories in the NFL, and we think about how they'll affect our team. So a few things from the news this week. Let's start, Waldman, with Eugene Monroe, no longer a member of the Baltimore Ravens. Now we're hearing Giants, makes sense. We're hearing 49ers. I mean, 49ers could use him, and Seahawks. So let's say we see tomorrow Eugene Monroe signs with Seahawks, or Eugene Monroe signs with Giants. This is a kind of headline that should make us go back to our Giants and Seahawks projections and look at them a little differently.
I think a tad bit, but again, what we need to see is whether or not there's going to be good unity with the rest of this line, and really who has a stronger line at this stage. And you would probably say that the Giants probably have a little bit more continuity than the Seahawks do, considering that they've revamped their entire line yet again heading into camp and are relying on Tom Cable to get this group together, which took them a half season last year. And they had Okung last year. They already had, they had 2 good, and Sweezy as well, who was a decent player. So I think the Seahawks could really use a guy like Monroe, and that would probably be and I might be a little biased about that, but that might be the best fit in terms of what they have, because they're not really strong at the tackle spot at this stage. So that would be helpful, but I'm sure that the Giants in the same way. It may help the running game a tick, but really what you're looking for more is pass protection. How good that's going to help out the quarterbacks in those situations. If Manning ends up getting them, that's probably a little bit more helpful from the standpoint of that he's not the type of guy that's going to be able to avoid sacks. Now, Russell Wilson, is the 3rd most hit quarterback, or the 2nd most hit quarterback in the league since he and Cam Newton came into the league. But that's if you're looking at ESPN stats, which count rushing plays. If you take that away, then you have a guy who's not quite as far, not as high up on that list. and his elusiveness makes him a player that, even without a known veteran like Monroe, might not be still neither here nor there in terms of an issue. I think for Russell Wilson, what you're looking for more is to have a fortified presence in the middle of the line, because that's where he's going to have the most issues, is if the pressure's coming up the middle in his face, as opposed to coming around the edge where he can run and really hold off a defensive end.
The other piece of news, Harmon, this week, and we talked about this guy when you were on the couch. He's part of the reception perception group of rookie wide receivers that you looked at, Tajay Sharp. And he's running with the first team. Now, Matt Waldman, I'm going to give you a chance to revise comments from the couch this week. You said, hey, yeah, I would maybe look at Dorial Green Beckham if he fell too far out of the Titans wide receivers. But now we have, as of the end of minicamp, Sharp running with the first team, Green Beckham with the second team, with the idea that it is for now that Sharp is with the first team, and perhaps they're motivating Dorial Green Beckham. This sounds familiar. How many of these stories turn out well? So I'll ask you the same question, and feel free to refresh people your thoughts on Sharp, and whether this puts him more on your dynasty radar. But the question that I put to Matt, as I'll put to you, was, is there any Titans receiver worth targeting or taking a closer look at for your redraft leagues this year?
Yeah, somebody asked me, starting out with Sharp, somebody asked me for my thoughts on him today, or the reception perception evaluation, and I took a quote from the big full results of the class, all 21 guys there, and is that Tajay Sharp and Sterling Shepard were the most experienced route runners in this class. They were the only two receivers to chart above the average at running all three of outs, comebacks, and flats. So those that like balanced route assignments, I thought would get them on the field early, and it looks like that's already happened with Sharp, which probably a lot of people weren't expecting. And one of the reasons that I think that he was falling completely off dynasty radars was that he's kind of just a contributor sort of level player. What a lot of people would say is boring. On a boring team. So that's normally not a mix that's going to get a lot of people excited for Dynasty, but there are some interesting things, like I mentioned, in Sharp's profile. I think, Waldman, you liked him a little bit in the RSP. I liked him a little bit from reception perception, but was a guy that I just never really talked about a lot because he's just other more exciting options. But it doesn't surprise me that he's ascended quickly and he's impressed in camp. I think that we should, not just dismiss Sharp's role in this, which is, I think, what everybody will want to do, which is what's the truth behind the Dorial Green Beckham thing. But I think that Sharp's ascension is probably legitimate. It's a good sign that he's getting these kind of reps already. I think he's a guy that could win a job, and he doesn't have a high ceiling at all, but certainly is a player with a lot of good things in his corner. And we all know John Moore's work with the Phenom Index. I think Sharp might have been the #1 player on the Phenom Index, or was at least close to the top. So, certainly a player that we shouldn't just brush off with this news. But in terms of, are there any Titans players I want to own, or receivers specifically that I want to own in redraft this year? I'm not sure. I've seen Dorial Green Beckham fall even before this news. Was falling to the 9th and 10th round in some of my MFL 10s, and I'm happy to take the gamble there, especially as like a 5th receiver in a best ball league. But the answer is trending more towards no. I don't want to own any of these guys.
Waldman, any revisions to your Green Beckham stance for the upcoming season, knowing that this is happening with Malarkey from Malarkey?
It's just, it's June Malarkey, so that's okay with me. I'm going to stick with Dorial Green Beckham at this stage of the game. And it might be a motivational ploy. It might also be more of a, hey, look, he's worked out with Mariota. He's in, hopefully he'll be in good enough shape. It's just our way of saying, let's keep you working for it here. And that's fine. Even if Tajay Sharp ends up starting for the Titans in September, the idea that Dorial Green Beckham won't be on the field, or won't be used as a vertical threat, or won't be used as a red zone threat every quarter, every series that they're eligible to put him on the field, I think would be foolish to discount. As far as Tajay Sharp is concerned, it's great for him, and I agree with Matt. He's a fine route runner. Everything that he said about Sharp was excellent analysis. And I would just add that he's a player that between, say, Michael Thomas, who was of the New Orleans Saints,
Right.
who was my number 5th ranked receiver in this class, and Tajay Sharp. The difference was so small that really, when you look at these players, if Tajay Sharp ended up in New Orleans, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we were talking about him being a guy that earned Drew Brees' trust for his
Right.
route running and being someone that they would want to use on the outside to alternate at least with some of the players here. I think what he does extremely well is he's very quick, and he's someone who understands how to get separation early at the line of scrimmage. He's going to get better at it, and he's someone that can really help you win in all 3 zones of the field and also do it in the middle of the field. He's a little more rugged than maybe his size suggests. He's 6'2". He's kind of rail thin at this stage at 194 pounds, but I would imagine he adds a little bit more muscle to his frame. And you could see him over the years gaining another 10 to 15 pounds and being a nice sized player for you. And the guys that I compared him to probably ranged in terms of good route runners who could give you a little bit more with a quarterback who knows how to anticipate. So you're looking at guys like Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt as the upside of that spectrum, and then guys like Darrell Jackson, the former Seahawk and Miami Dolphin, maybe in the mid-range of that spectrum, and maybe Terrence Williams you could probably put a little at the lower range, Kenbrell Tompkins at the lower range. So that's kind of the range of hit or miss that you would probably see him. And I have him, more closer to the Wayne Holt range, meaning that I think he can be a starter in this league, but I don't think he's at the level of being a Pro Bowl player. I mean, that's something that we're going to have to see how consistent he is against big competition and how he can fill out his frame and become a little bit more physical of a guy.
So
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but I think that this would be great because it'll make Green Beckham a little bit of a discount, if anything, which is nice. I still have him. I had him at wide receiver 39 before this, and I have him at wide receiver 39 after this. I mean, nothing's really changed for me. Like, I still want to own Dorial Green Beckham. I think now it's going to become at a little bit of discount, which is nice.
Well, and the reason that it should be basically unchanged, and why, Waldman, I think you not changing your stance is probably appropriate, is it's the upside you're chasing. And in the first 2 or 3 games, if it's Justin Hunter Part 2 and he's getting 20 snaps and 2 targets a game, and it's not looking like it's going to change, then you move on because it's a 9th or 10th round pick. Who cares? But it's the upside. But Matt Waldman, you said, hey, if Sharp had ended up in New Orleans, we'd be talking about him instead of Michael Thomas. Well, he didn't. Michael Thomas ended up in New Orleans, and yes, there was a report about, again, another report. And in fact, I think even Jeff Duncan said fantasy. It's funny now that we've come so far enough, guys, that beat writers address us directly. Fantasy players, you want Michael Thomas. So let's talk about Michael Thomas. If redraft, how much is he on your radar? Is he? Let's use the Dorial Green Beckham meridian. Is he above that meridian? And even more so, is he somebody that's a target, a true target? Waldman, is Michael Thomas somebody that, even though it's because he landed in New Orleans that we would be talking about him, because the situation is the other component here. Talent plus situation plus a hot start equals a rookie that's going to make an impact in fantasy leagues?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's nice that beat writers aren't laughing when they say fantasy owners like they used to. They used to chuckle at the end of it, kind of like we were grouped in with like paranormal researchers and UFO experts. So it was like
right.
It's kind of nice that we're no longer
Shriners.
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at Michael Thomas, I mean, to me, the meridian isn't whether he's above or below Dorial Green Beckham. I mean, I think that's a good starting point. He's above that. You start to wonder, is he in the same range as Amari Cooper last year? And I would say I'm probably on that upside of that spectrum and say, yes, I think he very much is capable of producing at a similar level as Amari Cooper last year, another player who I was high on as a rookie in redraft fantasy leagues. And I think the reasons are very similar. Both very good route runners. They are also, at least in Thomas's case, where he has a greater advantage, is that even though he may switch, maybe he'll be taken in and out of games, and rotated with Willie Snead or maybe something along those lines. I think Thomas, the fact that he can play slot, he can play outside for you, the fact that he's going to replace Colston in a lot of ways, and that he has a player like Drew Brees who's going to find great situations for him, the same way that that Sean Payton did for Willie Snead. I mean, I don't think Willie Snead's a special player. I think he's a good player and maybe was slightly underrated to some degree. But there are a lot of plays that were manufactured for him to get open, and because they needed him, they didn't have much else. In terms of after Cooks. So I think that if they can do that with Snead, they're going to be able to do that with Thomas and then some. So for me, I'm looking at him and feeling comfortable if he's my wide receiver 3. I think he can be a wide receiver 3 who's going to deliver, pretty good wide receiver 2 production for you year one. I think he can give you that kind of upside.
So Matt Harmon, and again, you watched a lot of Michael Thomas at Ohio State, so you have familiarity with the player. We know the role. We know the Marcus Colston role. We've discussed that intersection, but now you have this extra layer that, again, Jeff Duncan saying the second-round pick from Ohio State has already gained trust of Drew Brees. That's a huge positive sign for him. As Waldman said, Brees can manufacture. Peyton and Brees can manufacture opportunity plus talent, execution equals points in fantasy leagues. Are there potentially enough points there, not just to say, yeah, Michael Thomas is worth looking at, but to say maybe he should be on your short list. Maybe he should be a target for, as Waldman was saying, a third, fourth wide receiver. Again, we're looking at that 7th, 8th, 9th range round of drafts.
Well, I think that I wouldn't rule out that possibility. I certainly think that if we continue to hear the drumbeat throughout the offseason, let's also not forget that last week there was like a mix of reports where it was one beat writer was saying, all this excellent stuff about how he's on the same page, route adjustments with Drew Brees, et cetera, but then another was saying he's not going to beat out Brandon Coleman.
Well, but okay, but Brandon. I mean, we can say. One beat writer says one, but we could take a stand too and say.
Oh no, yeah. I would, of course, I would say that Michael Thomas far and away a better player than Brandon Coleman, and I think we mentioned he's a perfect fit for that role, and he is a good route runner that will get separation in man coverage from NFL defensive backs probably right away. The issue though, and I would disagree with a little bit of what Waldman said about Willie Snead, that I think he's not a special player, but I also think that he. Not so much that things were manufactured for him to get open, but I think his skill set and reliability in working open was what made him so appealing to Drew Brees early on, offered him that player that can execute on a variety of different routes. And, even at the beginning of the season, he was outplaying Brandon Cooks early on when Cooks was really a dud very early, and Snead kind of ascended out of nowhere. So I like Snead more than Thomas this year. I'm open to being completely wrong on that, but I think that Snead and I think Michael Thomas and Kobe Fleener kind of cancel each other out in a little bit of ways because they're both big red zone threats that should in theory operate in the slot and everything if he plays the Colston role. But yeah, I like Snead a little bit more this year, but I'm certainly open to the possibility that Thomas does give you that high-end production that we're talking about.
So let's talk another rookie wide receiver, and specifically in redraft terms, and another rookie wide receiver that is getting buzz as we're winding up mini camps, and it's no surprise. And Mike Sullivan, the OC, offensive coordinator there in New York, talking about Sterling Shepard. And, it matches the reports from Matt Waldman, from Matt Harmon, from myself. Shepard was a player I watched a lot early in the process and really liked. And he just said he has a demonstrated suddenness, an explosiveness, an ability to make contested catches, and separate from defenders. That's Sterling Shepard. Basically assured of that number 2 job. And, I don't know if there's been numbers run or we've really looked at this, but when there's that number 1 who is as dominant as Odell Beckham and draws as much attention as Odell Beckham, that frees things up for number 2. This is a team that's going to have a high volume of pass attempts. So we can say, hey, Shepard or Thomas, but again, not just Shepard or Thomas, or yes, Shepard is worth an 8th-round pick, but is this somebody we need to be saying he could be part of a very successful draft strategy? Eventually we're saying reserve a pick for this guy because we love Laquan Treadwell, but you start to look at the pieces coming together, Shepard might have a higher ceiling as the number 2 that Treadwell has as the number 1 from a fantasy perspective. As Cecil would say, what say you, Matt Harmon?
Yeah, Shepard, I think it's all kind of coming together. The storm is coming to focus. The planets are aligning for him to be the rookie receiver to own this year. I mean, in terms of the skill set, what more can we say that hasn't already been said, by all three of us, that it's that he's the consummate professional route runner, earns separation at all levels of the field on a variety of different routes. You talk about reception perception, far and away beat everybody else in terms of success rate versus man coverage, over 82%, success rate versus press coverage, 91.1%, far and away the best at both of those categories in this class. And he's in a perfect landing spot. I like Corey Coleman with the Browns. I like Laquan Treadwell with the Vikings. We talked about Michael Thomas. But, I mean, none of these guys are at the intersection of volume and opportunity like Shepard is, even though he's the number 2 there. It's a high-volume pass offense. Ben McAdoo in the West Coast offense asks you to run a lot of timing execution routes, and that's Shepard's bread and butter. I mean, I'm at the point where I think it is a situation where we should be reserving. If he's there in the 7th to 8th round, I think you click with no hesitation. I mean, this is if he's already locked up the number 2 job, then I don't really know what would be the negative in his category at this point. So, I'm planning a piece for NFL.com in July where I talk about kind of all my receiver strategies. Not really strategies, but my guys. Who I'm going to go to bat for this year, and he's going to be a key point in that.
Are you going to bat for him, Waldman? Who's your number? I'll ask you the question like this: who is your number 1 redraft rookie wide receiver? Mute button. Uh-oh. He's percolating.
Whoops. There we go. Sorry about that, fellas. This
has been a hell of an execution podcast so far.
It has been. But yeah, I mean, it's not Shepard, though. He's awfully close because he's probably the most well-coached receiver of the college rookies that are coming in. Jay Norvell was the coach there, pretty much wrote the book on coaching wide receivers, and he's the technician's technician, and that's going to be a really nice thing for him in a West Coast style offense. For everything that Matt said there, Matt and I watched him in the RSP film room, done boiler rooms on him, so you can check all that stuff out in addition to reception perception. My only concern about Shepard is a really minor one, and it's not even one that I would pay attention to right now. I mean, if I were picking, I would click just like Matt in the 7th or 8th round and feel pretty good about it. But it's just that the New York media tends to overhype everything, whether it's good or bad. And I just there are times that I just wonder, when they say it's locked up. I'm sure it probably is. But it's just one of those deals where I kind of am a little bit wary about what's being said there from that standpoint. The number 1 guy for me is Laquan Treadwell. Yeah. I just think that he is going to have a huge share of what goes on in that offense in the red zone, after the catch. They're going to feed him the ball in a way where I feel like that he's going to have better opportunities also because I think the offensive line's better in Minnesota. What they're looking for him to do is going to be a lot more helpful to that team. And I think he's going to have more big play ability in certain respects after the catch, whereas I think that Shepard is known for being pretty good after the catch, but I think he's a little overrated in that category, to be quite honest. I think he's good making the first man miss, but I don't think he's good at being able to turn on the jets and beat a lot of people unless it's a well-designed play that's set up for him to do so. Where he's underrated, I think, more than anything, is actually in the red area, being able to go and win jump balls. He's kind of to me, the player he is, and I've been saying this probably since November of last year, is he's Steve Smith, the former Giant. So it's a perfect fit. It's no wonder they probably just see Steve Smith and they're putting him back into the lineup now the knee's miraculously healed. I mean, this is a guy that Steve Smith had over 100 catches one year
Right.
for the Giants, and that was when Akeem Nicks was actually still a healthy star. So I think that it's a great 1-2 punch, but I'm not quite there. He's probably my number two, number three rookie in redrafts. But I wouldn't blame you for taking. He's probably the safest. He is absolutely by far the safest wide receiver of the bunch.
Yeah, it was 2009. It's his third year in the league. 107 catches, 1,220 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And at that point, Hakeem Nicks, he only started 6 games that year, and he had 47 catches for 790 and 6 touchdowns. And I remember, Waldman, I remember that was the offseason that people were saying, like, he made so many of his fantasy points came on big plays and spectacular plays, and that's on a low target volume, and you can't count on that. And I thought that was really strange. Like, I thought it was a good thing for players to make really good plays, but I guess if you make too many of them, it's not a good thing.
I think Steve Smith gave Matt Leinart the Heisman Trophy. If you really take a look
Yeah.
if you really took a look at USC's play, he was by far the best receiver on that team, and he made Matt Leinart look awfully good on plays where people were, broadcasters would gush and have those big career moments with how they would broadcast things. But when you look at the tape, it was like Steve Smith made that happen, not Matt Leinart.
Yeah, or Dwayne Jarrett. So Corey Coleman, since he's come up a couple of times, I don't want to talk about Coleman specifically, although feel free to talk about him if you want. But I feel like Cleveland's offense is one of those pictures, like the old lady with wrinkles or the young woman with makeup on, where if you look at it a certain way, the nice, beautiful young woman would be Hugh Jackson. Up tempo, you're hearing some mentions of up tempo. Even though RG3 is not standing out, that's fine. If it's not RG3, if he's not playing well enough to cut it, it's Josh McCown, who was fine last year. Go back and watch Josh McCown against Denver last year. He was solid. He had a good game against them, one of the better games any quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater also had a great game against them. So if it's Josh McCown, we're fine with that. But we're looking at the Browns' offense, Cleveland playing tonight in the NBA Finals. Also, the U.S. had a goal to go ahead in the Copa America quarterfinals against Ecuador. Anyway, so thank you for joining us with such great sports competition tonight on Thursday night. But Waldman, of course, it's Cleveland Cavaliers trying to take this to Game 7. Cleveland Browns trying to turn this thing around. Same story as always. But Hugh Jackson, he's had great success revitalizing offenses with not that much to work with. We know they have an offensive line, which is the foundation of offensive success. We liked their offense a few years ago with Kyle Shanahan. But we look across this offense at potential fantasy commodities. Corey Coleman, again, around that same range. Let's say Corey Coleman compared against those other rookie wide receivers we talked about. Gary Barnidge, you're comparing to guys like maybe, say, Ladarius Green and Antonio Gates. And then you get to Isaiah Crowell and Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson, maybe you're comparing to somebody like Charles Sims or Giovanni Bernard in your PPR running back drafts. Isaiah Crowell a little bit farther, maybe around the same range as, say, Chris Ivory or LeGarrette Blount. Are any of these pieces of this offense, because of Hugh Jackson, on your shopping list? Because on the old lady side of the picture, Waldman, it's still Cleveland. It's still an offense completely under construction and quarterbacks. And sure, one of these fifth-round receivers will hit, but there's a lot here that needs to come together, and that's an argument to maybe avoid the whole thing. Where on that spectrum are you falling, Waldman?
I think you have to be, if you're going to be selective about players, what you're going to do is create a draft strategy probably that says, I'm going to pick one Brown, and if I win, great. If I don't, I didn't pick the whole batch.
Right.
It's kind of like when I was growing up in Cleveland, you don't really, if you were fishing in Lake Erie, you might get a live fish or you might get a floating one. So the first fish I ever saw in Lake Erie was a dead floating one. So I would tell you that it's kind of like the lake, it might be the Lake Erie offense right now. It's supposedly cleaner, since the days of the river catching on fire nearby. But if you go to the beach, you may still see a Pepsi can float up out of the surf. So when you look at this, Duke Johnson, to me, is probably the guy with the most upside in this offense, but you're going to have to pay a pretty good price for him. And considering that there's been a lot of talk by Hugh Jackson that he thinks Isaiah Crowell could be a really fine back in this league, and that he sees him as someone that would get the bulk of the carries. I would rather look at Crowell when you see the fact that he's bunched with guys like Chris Ivory, who's overhyped because his contract. They talk about the contract, but it's really talking to someone that's inside the league is really a prove it deal, and it's really more of a way of saying, look, we want him paired with Yeldon in the same way that maybe, say, the New England Patriots are pairing LeGarrette Blount and Dion Lewis in certain respects, so that they can pound it one week and then play kind of smaller ball the next, even though Yeldon isn't quite nearly that small. But Yeldon to me is still the lead back in this show. So I would rather have Crowell, who I think has more upside than, say, Blount or Ivory in that situation. Then when you take a look at Barnidge is the safest pick. To me, he doesn't have the most upside, but you know that I would rather have him over Ladarius Green, who basically, I mean, I know that we have Ladarius Green fans here and everywhere in fantasy, but you know, my thoughts, and I've just posted this at the Gut Check this week, is that when you look at Ladarius Green, Kyle Posey did a wonderful piece on him last year from Bolts of the Blue, and explained that Green just isn't very physical off the line of scrimmage. He gets rerouted a ton. He doesn't seem to know how to read through zones in a way that's going to find openings. And that's the difference between him being a really nice physical phenom who can chase down Tavon Austin from 30 yards away, and being a guy who can get open and get the rapport from a veteran like Phillip Rivers. And if you can't take over this gig, being as physically good as he is, from an aging Antonio Gates, and they don't want to keep you, and maybe it's a hard situation for them. Maybe it's like, we know he can be good, but you know, Gates is still our guy with Rivers right now, and we don't want to have to pay him an exorbitant amount of money to keep him on our bench. I get that, but I also think it's that he's just not savvy enough as a football player, and to me, he's going to be, you know, so when I look at that, I would rather have a guy like Barnidge, who I think that will be a safety blanket for whoever the quarterback is. And then when you look at the receivers, I think that this is just an absolute mess because you don't really know who it's going to be. You know, Coleman is certainly probably your high ceiling, low floor pick. I know there's a lot of talk about maybe Terrell Pryor. What if Josh Gordon actually does come back? You know, so all of those things to me is like, if I'm picking a receiver, I'm picking Barnidge is counting as a receiver for me, and then maybe I'll take a wild swing at somebody like Pryor or Gordon very late. And after we hear from Harmon, I know that the sponsors would love to be able to have their say too.
Well, no, and Harmon dropped out to give me the skids there for a no.
You don't want to talk about Cleveland.
No, yeah, exactly.
Even though they have the dog pound, you'd think he'd want to talk about them.
I know. Well, listen,
I'm here.
Yeah, he's back, but also back in your life, and maybe still in your life with other sports. FanDuel.com. Building a team is easy. You pick your players, stay under the cap, sit back, watch your team win. Entry fees start at just $1. Anyone can play. You think you know fantasy. You can prove it at FanDuel.com. And for those of you that are new FanDuel users, you will be able to, if you deposit $10, get a free Football Guys Insider Pro subscription if you use the code FBGPod. You click the microphone, you use the code FBGPod, and you got your $10 to play with it on FanDuel. And of course, you're gonna have a lot of content, Football Guys, that helps you maximize that from the Brain Trust. And you get your free Football Guys Insider Pro subscription. If you already have one, that's okay. You'll get another year added on, FanDuel.com, and the code FBGPod to claim your free Football Guys Insider Pro subscription today with a $10 deposit for new FanDuel users. All right, Cleveland offense. You want to talk about this dog, Harmon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, first of all, talking about the quarterback situation, if it does end up being Josh McCown over Robert Griffin III, even though I like the idea of the Robert Griffin III rebound story, if it ends up being McCown, I think that's probably a good thing, honestly, for the fantasy players, because McCown is definitely, you know, he's a risky guy. He's not afraid to sling it around. And like you mentioned, Sigmund, he actually was playing very well last year. So I think that could end up being a net positive for everybody involved, and especially Gary Barnidge. I like Barnage a lot at his value right now, especially the sports hernia seems to be depressing that value again even more. When he was like an 8th round pick in MFL 10s, now he's more of a 9th to 10th round pick. And I mean, I think that's fantastic. I have him right in there in the second tier of tight ends, along with guys like Greg Olson and Travis Kelce and Tyler Eifert. And, really, I think that he's kind of the cutoff point of that second tier. But I see no reason why. Like I don't really feel comfortable messing around with tight ends later in the draft this year. I really want to get one of those guys and set it and forget it. And I think that Barnage is kind of the longest I can hold out for. And I really like him to lead the team in targets and be again a very productive asset this year. I like Corey Coleman this year. I think that he will offer big boom weeks again. Probably more of a best ball player just because it's going to be tough to predict. When they get on a run-heavy game script with Isaiah Crowell, which is a great mention by Waldman because I think he's going so overlooked. So overlooked. I think he was my last pick in our first NFL fantasy staff mock, and I mean that could be potentially a starting running back for your fantasy team if you go with a zero running back approach. So I mean, there's value to be had in this offense for sure. Barnage is my favorite of them, and I mean, I'll be watching the other rookie receivers. Rashard Higgins is always already running with the 3 wide receiver sets, which is I like that. But we'll see how it continues to go. Probably those guys aren't going to matter in fantasy this year, though.
Yeah, it's still Cleveland, and they still have to get an offense to come together. But I do think that Hugh Jackson will improve the offense. It's just a question of how much he'll improve the offense. I want to run this. Of course, it's going to be a wide receiver-centric show because Matt Harmon's here. Matt Harmon also soon to appear on the couch. So in some ways, I might be using up some of the fresher takes, but this is one of my own that I want to run past you all because I was just reformatting, redoing PPR rankings this week. Got my wide receiver tiers. I should finish them up tomorrow and get them out there. One player that I ended up higher on, I think that Jason Wood might have been one spot higher than me. I don't know who was first and who was second, but we both have him in our top 10 receivers. And I was already starting to warm to him before you started hearing things out of Colts minicamp that T.Y. Hilton looks like a player ready for a career year. That T.Y. Hilton looks dominant. I mean, he looks like he's taking his game to another level. I look at T.Y. Hilton as basically equal to Jordy Nelson. I think that he was producing at a Jordy Nelson-like clip before he got a little dinged at the end of 2014. 2015, we're just going to chalk up. Harmon, what has perception revealed to you about Hilton in the past? And are we not seeing, I believe, that he is a clear number one receiver in an offense that will be among the better pass offenses in the league, with one of the better quarterbacks in the league, and he actually has stayed healthy. Last year for him to have 1,100 and 6 or 8 touchdowns with what they trotted out there was heroic. What can he do if he has Andrew Luck all year? Where do you stand on Hilton short term, and what's your overall scouting report on him among the best wide receivers in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been that high on T.Y. Hilton. I've always been one of the lower ones on him. I think he's a fine player. But see, this is my problem with him. When people start talking about him as a approaching the top 10 or even one of the better receivers in the league, I just can't get on board with that, which is too bad because he's a really nice player. He's a good story, being a 3rd round pick that's put together a really good career. I mean, one that's probably surprised a lot of people for sure. But I don't see him. I mean, I can't justify him near the top 10 or even in my first 3 tiers of fantasy receivers. And I like I said, I really like Hilton, but I also think that offense still needs a true number one. And if anybody's going to be that on this team, I think it's Dante Moncrief. And I would much rather take Moncrief at his value than Hilton at his. I could be wrong on Hilton, but I mean, I don't know what room he has really to improve in terms of having a career year, because I think he's already at his ceiling as a route runner. I don't see him improving leaps and bounds from that perspective, and just in terms of, I mean, there's just so many other receivers I would rather have over him. So he's not going to be nearly that high in my rankings. Again, I like Hilton, but he's probably just more of a guy that's never going to be on any of my teams because somebody else is always going to be higher than him or higher than me on him.
So Waldman, we have a couple of polar opposites here. Where are you going to fall? North Pole, South Pole, equator?
Oh, I'm laying back on my tube in the equator right now because looking at this particular situation, Hilton was a guy I loved taking in dynasty drafts because he was a bargain at that point. But I haven't been able to get him like Harmon. I've been able to get him in other leagues very often. But when you look at him physically, he's 3 pounds different than Antonio Brown. And physically, not talking about skills in terms of routes and contested catches, but physically, he's every bit as talented as Antonio Brown. I really do think that, and I thought that for a while. He was a more raw talent in my opinion. But to me, the issue isn't whether he's going to get better at routes and releases and all those types of things. Is Andrew Luck going to get better?
Right.
Is this
That's a good
offensive
point.
line going to get better? Is this offensive scheme suited for a guy like T.Y. Hilton to actually thrive at a level where he isn't as boom bust, or he isn't as someone that is limited in what they throw at him? And I think that he's limited in the types of Matt would probably be able to tell me this more than what I'm just going off of what I've seen, rather as opposed to what I've I haven't tallied it, but I'd wonder after I've mentioned this whether or not T.Y. Hilton has as diverse a set of routes that he runs on a regular basis as somebody like Antonio Brown. I don't think that's the case.
No.
Okay. Then good. Then that helps because I mean I look at this and I mean my biggest fear is I'm also down on the Indianapolis Colts passing offense as a whole. I just don't think Andrew Luck. I think Andrew Luck is in danger of becoming the Archie Manning of this generation if they can't get this offensive line straight, because he's taken more hits than pretty much anyone. If you're looking at non-ESPN hits and NFL.com hits as the one that you're using as the mark, and I tend to side with the NFL.com folks. So
Respect.
that's right. That's right.
Mm.
So I look at that and I'm just worried that I saw him at Stanford, and where he really looked bad when you foiled Andrew Luck, it was when they blitzed the crap out of him, and when they could do a lot of different things with zone blitzes. He was always weak at zone blitzes. He's still weak against zone blitzes, and I think that as courageous as he is, he's not Russell Wilson when it comes to avoiding people. He's a bigger dude who's got nice quickness, but all that I'm saying here is that this offense, I'm still shaky on scheme. I'm still shaky on supporting cast, and they don't give Hilton the diversity of routes. So I have him ranked 16th right now. I'd be glad to get him as my wide receiver too if I can get him there, but based on what, looking at just our rankings of football guys right now, I can see that that's probably not going to happen.
So
I think that you go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting you again, but
No, go ahead.
it is what it is. So I think that Walton brings up a lot of good points, and in terms of just projecting the offense, I'm not projecting like an Andrew Luck, like what we were thinking about last year, and so that's why I'm not going to be projecting T.Y. Hilton for a big season also, but I am projecting that Dante Moncrief has a breakout year because I think he offers, again, you talk about diversity of routes, you talk about winning catches in traffic. I mean, those are the things that Moncrief does that Hilton just does not offer you. So I think in a perfect world, a player like Moncrief is going to be your number one receiver over a guy like Hilton, and we'll see if that actually ends up materializing. I'll still have Hilton probably ranked slightly higher, but because I'm projecting and that breakout season for Moncrief, but not necessarily projecting a QB1 type of 01 overall type of season for Andrew Luck for the reasons that Waldman did a good job of mentioning. The gap between Moncrief and Hilton, I think, for me, will be much smaller than probably the consensus.
So, and I'll touch on what Waldman said because I think that he brings up something important. Just to put a little cap on the pro, since I'm the only one on the pro side here. In 2014, going through week 14, because week 15 was when he got dinged and he missed week 16. On a points per game basis in PPR leagues, Hilton was wide receiver 7, and the receivers ahead of him were Antonio Brown, Demaryius Thomas, Jordy Nelson, Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, Emmanuel Sanders. Remember, this is Peyton's record year, and then there's Hilton, and I think that it comes down to what Waldman was saying. I think it's a very important concern to bring up. that will this Indy offense ever look like that offense? I mean, we saw that offense still on a stepping stone to being an even better offense. And I know I got taken in, and I took a lot of y'all with me. I'm sorry on Frank Gore last year because I was picturing, well, the improvement from Richardson to Gore alone was going to result in a net improvement for this offense. And it never came together last year for a lot of reasons. And I think Waldman's right to say we shouldn't just resume that they'll pick up where they left off. And another offense that I have similar, but not the same degree, concerns would be Green Bay. And the two things go together are Luck and Rodgers. Right, going into last year, they were the clear number one and number two fantasy quarterbacks, and for different reasons, they were total duds. Now, in Luck's case, he was hurt. You have a little bit of improvement on the offensive line. Well, the center and one side of the offensive line looks okay. The right side of the offensive line, not so much. With Rodgers, you can point at Jordy Nelson, but I also think Rodgers looked rattled at times last year. Look, we've seen quarterbacks lose their better targets and still generate offense. I mean, look how many guys has Drew Brees gone through? What kind of talent has Drew Brees really had during his prodigious run? Or even Tom Brady adapting. Aaron Rodgers didn't adapt. Now, you might say, well, it's because he had crap to play with, but that's mostly what he has just with Jordy Nelson back this year. So we have a lot of questions here, Harmon, because we have the question again of, do you go back in on Aaron Rodgers? Do you go back in on maybe Eddie Lacy, or if you don't like Lacy, James Starks? Do you just slot Jordy Nelson where you had him last year? Do you just slot Randall Cobb? Is there a third target angle you're looking here? Jared Cook, Devontae Adams take 2, Jeff Janis take 1 if it ever happens, even Jared Abbrederis or Ty Montgomery. What do we do with this Packers offense? Because it was like that Colts offense when they were saying, you want players from this offense. You want to have a piece of this offense. Do you still want to have a piece of this offense?
I do. I'm certainly on the more positive end of projecting things for the Green Bay offense this year. You mentioned, what has Drew Brees had to work with, but I'd argue that there's not much worse you could get to work with than what Aaron Rodgers was dealing with last year, and even in the beginning of the season. I mean, he was working wonders with that. I mean, he was working, and let's just review it from a real sense here. I mean, it was the carcass of James Jones, whatever, and Rodgers was making it work with Jones until defenders. Robert Kirkman presents James Jones 2015. Before defenses completely figured him out how to take him away for the most part. Devontae Adams, you couldn't have a worse season. I mean, it was just a disaster from every angle. Randall Cobb was playing, out of position and also was hurt. He mentioned that earlier. I mean, early in the season, he even said, with the shoulder injury, I might not be right all year. And I think he was probably correct in saying that. Eddie Lacy was overweight and wasn't playing well. The coaching staff was constantly having to play mind games with him. Now, I think that Jordy Nelson is a game changer. I mean, I think he is legitimately a presence that is to be reckoned with and will open things up for this entire offense, and elevate guys like Cobb. James Jones is not back, but also they have Jared Cook, who I think will be an upgrade over Richard Rodgers, who was putting up some nice numbers, had the great Hail Mary catch, but was pretty bad on just a route to route basis. So again, just another point of upgrade there. And like I said, Nelson, while he did have an ACL tear, he's older. I also think he is the elite level craftsman that can give you wide receiver 1 production for at least the next 2 to 3 years. And like I said, Rodgers was certainly rattled because things were just so messed up by the end of the year, but was also, that 5 touchdown games against the Chiefs, I think it was early in the year, maybe not 5 touchdowns, but whatever. The point being that he was, defying the laws of quarterbacking there. So I'm pretty passionate about going back in on the Green Bay offense, especially because Lacy is looking like he's in shape. And I really do think that the team could really benefit from putting Jeff Janis out there. I really hope that he ends up being their third wideout. I think that what he showed in the Cardinals game was legitimate. I wrote a reception perception piece about it. Small sample size, of course, but I think he would be the one that would really benefit them the most and bring them something different from what they don't have. I mean, to me, if he's not the third receiver, I think they're just being stubborn about minute details, and this is coming from somebody that puts a lot of detail into watching routes. So just take that for what it is.
When I think about Janis, and I think about this wide receiver 3 question for them. I think that some flexibility here. Why can't this be a role that they play with the committee? Because the strengths and weaknesses are so distinct. Janice, you're going to want to use for 50-50 balls, deep shots. You put him and Jordy Nelson on opposite sides of the field, and you string out the defense. You stretch it out so that the safeties have to be able to cover sideline to sideline on both sides. Aberderis is the crafty route runner. Aberderis is the guy that you'd have more timing, sharp, quick-hitting type plays. Devontae Adams, maybe we like more like some of the classic James Jones plays, the back shoulder, fade, those plays where he can adjust to the ball in the air, not necessarily use speed or quickness to create separation, but ball skills. And then Ty Montgomery, who actually wasn't bad last year before getting hurt, so surprisingly good. With all those things in mind, though, I just want to toss that out there, that maybe the answer is that they can use different players on plays where they're trying to do different things. Waldman, are you sharing the optimism of Harmon? This Green Bay offense, we're going to put back in our top 10 offenses. It should hum again now that Jordy Nelson's back.
I think they'll be in the top half. I don't know if they'll be top 10, but I definitely would say, as the co-chairman of the Jordy Nelson Skills fan club, that I am totally on board with Matt Harmon about him being one of the best receivers in the league, and losing him was a big deal. And let's remember something about Drew Brees and the lack of receivers that he had, and what has he had to do with? Well, all his receivers had brains when it came to operating the position. And I'm not saying that the receivers are stupid in Green Bay. I'm not saying that by a long shot. But when it comes to savvy at the position and understanding how to read coverage and being on the same page with the quarterback and being open, I think that Drew Brees has always had receivers who had an advantage there, even if they were at a disadvantage in terms of being able to run in their underwear at a timed event in Indianapolis. So to me, that's a bigger deal, and it shows up with that type of a scheme. Now, we also have to remember something else. Something also tells me that Drew Brees is a little easier to get along with, and maybe he has super high expectations, but he seems to be the type of quarterback that, oh, you didn't run the right route, I see where you're going, I'm going to adjust. Aaron Rodgers strikes me as the guy, when you see him in post-game interviews, saying, well, if you're not open, I'm not throwing you the ball. If you're not open, I'm not throwing you the ball. And if you do something bad, I'm just going to stare at you and give you that look that, that tells you that I'm really angry with you. And rather than being able to just, work it out in the, on the fly and figure out what to do. Now, he has that strong arm, is able to do that at, during pass rushes and being able to improvise a little bit. But something tells me that when receivers don't run the right routes with him, it irritates the heck out of him. And you should understand that Jared Aberderis, in that respect, does run the right routes. That's why he's lobbied for him twice in the past year to be on the field more, even though he may not be the underwear Olympics champion of the Green Bay Packers wide receiving corps. So to me, what's underrated about Aberderis, though, is that you can see some plays of him against a guy like Bradley Roby at Ohio State, where he's high-pointing passes and making some really nice plays as an athlete. So I think that they're in a much better position now because they've got really three guys who can be that supporting cast wide receiver. Cobb's not playing out of position, as Matt Harmon said. And then you have, arguably one of the best wide receivers in football coming back. So I definitely feel more optimistic about it. It's just a question for me, once again, is the line, whether or not Nelson gets off to a hot start early on and is good to go. And if those two things click, then, yeah, we're back in action. If not, then, you might be looking at the wide receiver version of, the Marx Brothers or the Three Stooges, who are trying to figure out what's going on, with Aaron Rodgers playing the straight man and being the guy that's being the victim of all of the comic leanings of the Aberderis, Montgomery, Adams core.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, the straight man, unless he's talking about UFOs, the encounters. And it's funny, like, yes, you can tell that Aaron Rodgers is that kind of quarterback by his body language and his gestures on the field.
And he's great. He's just he's just a taskmaster, and sometimes that's the type of thing that you need a certain type of player to be able to pair with that. He's not Joe Montana or Drew Brees in terms of being laid back and being like, well, that's all right. But what do our sponsors have to say?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. This is great. This is teamwork, folks. This is teamwork. Unlike some people who've been stepping on my transitions. You would never do that if Cecil was here, Harmon.
Well, that's why I'm doing it now.
Everything falls apart.
Woof, woof.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the cat.
Dad's away.
I know exactly. The mice will play. Football Guys Players Championship. Hey! On Sunday, June 5th, the Football Guys Players Championship for 2016 kicked off. Ongoing daily drafts through the start of the NFL season on September 8th. $250,000 grand prize, $1.8 million in total prizes, championship round prizes down to 650th place, 2,000 in league prizes, 1,500 for first place, 500 for second, capped at 6,900 teams. All prizes are guaranteed. The entire prize pool is in escrow. Come on, it's Football Guys. We're going to put our name on it. You know the entire prize pool is in escrow. June 5th, running through September 8th. $350 to enter. You can get a 3-pack of teams for $1,000. But you should know this. Right now, if you register for the FPC before the end of the month, Tuesday, June 30th, you will receive a 1-year subscription to footballguys.com. Insider Pro subscription, $34.95 value. A 3-pack of teams gets you a 3-year subscription for free, $72.95 value. And again, if you're a subscriber, you get years added on. And, okay, I get it, okay? Now listen, we love drafting early because we can get the drop. What was the term, Harmon, what was the term that Joe Bryant used? The June casualties?
June casualties. That was so great.
Jay Ajayi, a June casualty, right? Because you're looking at Jay Ajayi right now. You're getting him in the 5th or 6th round. You're saying when people realize that he's going to be the starter, unquestioned starter, and he's going to continue to build buzz, it's going to be a 4th round pick or maybe even a 3rd round pick. But then you say, I'm drafting early, guys get hurt. I'm going to go into week 1 with, what if I go into week 1 and both of my tight ends are hurt or something? Things happen. I'd rather wait. Well, there are going to be 2 preseason free agency runs, September 2nd and September 7th. So you can draft now, and you have 2 times of waiver wire runs before week 1 to rectify anything. And I also love that. By the way, if you're doing rules for a league, I love that because then you don't have to draft a kicker. You don't have to draft a defense. Use all of your draft picks for flyers that you want to watch during camp and preseason, and then right before the season starts, get your defense and your kicker for week 1. Football Guys Players Championship, again, underway. Free 1-year subscription with 1 team, free 3-year subscription with 3 teams if you buy your team, register before June 30th. Parting shot. I was going to go to a topic here, but well, let me go to a topic, but also I'll say in a parting shot way y'all can bring up anything you want here. We haven't talked about the Chicago wide receivers much. Again, a wide receiver show. Matt Harmon, reception here. We haven't talked about the Chicago wide receivers once. Now, Alshon Jeffrey, arguably, last year and the year before, really, especially last year with Brandon Marshall gone, really elevated to maybe not quite the Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, DeAndre Hopkins level, but right there at the next level. He was dinged up a lot last year, too, but he was a dominant player. I mean, he was a player that you knew was going to get the lion's share of targets, even in a not very aggressive pass offense in terms of run-pass splits. I think the Bears were in the top 5 or 6 in rush attempts, and they were a losing team. Now you have this year, enter one Kevin White. So Alshon Jeffrey's still going to cost you a 2nd-round pick. Does Kevin White, Waldman, I'll start with you. Does Kevin White being on the other side, and the fact, again, that this is a John Fox team, they're not going to fill the air with footballs. I know that Peyton Manning did that, but that's not this team, okay? Or maybe you can tell me I'm wrong about that. Are we looking at Alshon Jeffrey in the 2nd round? Are we looking at Kevin White around, say, he's a 6th or 7th round pick? Or are we saying those prices reflect upper-level outcomes and maybe one of the 2 of them can do it, but it's too uncertain of a situation now that you have a viable receiver on the other side of Alshon Jeffrey?
I'm not sure I'm going to go the John Fox is a stick in the mud kind of path. Only because maybe he's finally realized if he wants to stay in the league that Stephen Davis isn't going to be his path. And then again, you've got Jordan Howard, who reminds me of Stephen Davis, so that might happen. But I do remember them having 2 guys during that Super Bowl run by the names of Muhsin Muhammad and Steve Smith, and they were pretty darn good. And the ball went up in the air an awful lot with a guy who I thought was a lot worse than Jay Cutler.
Delhomme.
And even Steve Smith. We have those classic outtakes. You should go to YouTube and try and find some classic outtakes of Steve Smith saying things at the sideline of Delhomme, things like, you know, I love you, man. You know I love you. And then just proceed to rip him a new one.
But you're bad.
Yeah, you're horrible. What were you thinking? That was horrible, you know? So I think that Jay Cutler has progressively played a little bit better. I also believe that, you know, we can look at Lowell Dog or what's
Dwell Loganes.
Loganes,
a hand-picked Jay Cutler guy, a Cutler guy through and through.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, our buddy Jay Wood, you know, cringes every time he thinks about that guy. But when he was with the Titans, they had Jake Locker. You know, Jake Locker and what else? I'm not sure that there was really anything to look at when it came to running an offense, because Jake Locker was not a conceptually sound quarterback. He was a fundamentally sound quarterback. He was an athletic quarterback, but I think the reason he's out of the league is that he just really wasn't a very sharp quarterback when it came to putting it all together. I think that Jay Cutler, you have to look at him and you know, on the one hand, he deserves some of the bashing that he's gotten, but he's also a survivor. I mean, you think about how many offensive coordinators that he's played through and what he's been able to do in some given instances with no line, with bad, you know, offensive coordinators trying to ramrod their scheme into surrounding personnel that didn't fit Mike Martz. And you realize that, maybe he will be able to turn a corner and have a Carson Palmer-like end to his career at some point. And when you look at a guy like Kevin White, he's more talented than Alshon Jeffrey from a physical standpoint. I mean, he's a good notch up the ladder when you're talking about physical talent. It's just, can he develop the skills that he needs to get off the line of scrimmage more consistently and beat top corners in the league and become that reliable player? If he can do that this year, you're looking at great upside. You're looking at really instant wide receiver one upside. But that would be a very low odds proposition this year. I think that really what you're seeing from him is, I think that you consider him as a wide receiver 3, and his upside is probably still wide receiver 3 with some like gigantic games and some games where he's completely disappeared.
So, Harmon, you're nodding along at least at the idea that Kevin White's more physically talented than Alshon Jeffrey, and I think that shouldn't be that controversial if we're comparing apples to apples. Kevin White at this point in his career, Alshon Jeffrey at this point in his career. What's the fantasy takeaway here as we look at these two receivers, Jay Cutler, John Fox, Dwell Gaines, this cast of characters in Chicago?
Yeah, I think the fantasy takeaway is that this passing game is pretty underrated as a whole because of maybe the John Fox effect. But, as Waldman mentioned, there's Jordan Howard, and then there's Jeremy Langford, and then there's Kadeem Carey that everybody kind of wants to forget about, but certainly probably shouldn't. There's even Jaquiz Rodgers, they said, will hold a role. I think the backfield is a mess, but the passing game is pretty clear to me. You mentioned Jeffrey was just on a torrid pace in the games that he was healthy, was really tearing it up from a target percentage standpoint, was just getting fed the football. And that is certainly Jay Cutler's tendency is to find his guy and continue to go to that guy. But I think he'll have two guys. I think Kevin White and Alshon Jeffrey can both be number one receivers in this league. I think that Kevin White taking a year off, injured for an entire season, is probably maybe a good thing. He has more time. He had more time to theoretically get into the playbook, and I think he can come in, not as a traditional rookie. I think that's the thing that people say a lot is like, well, he's a year off, now he's basically a rookie. But no, he's had time to be in the building, learn some of the routes, just get a feel for being a part of, the NFL lifestyle, which is certainly something we don't talk about enough. But I love Kevin White from a prospect standpoint. I think he can, like Waldman said, can give you wide receiver 3 numbers this year. I really like Kevin White. I have him, I think, in the wide receiver 30 range, and on the high end of that too, like wide receiver 31. And I love Alshon Jeffrey too, and also Zach Miller. Good player, played really well last year. If you miss out on some of those top tight ends, Miller is the guy that I would come away with thinking that He'll be the third option in this passing game. They really don't have any other receivers worth their snuff right now. So I really like all those guys. And that intersects back at Jay Cutler, who I think is also underrated.
Not even getting drafted sometimes.
Yeah,
outside of the top 20 or 22 quarterbacks.
That's insane.
Yeah, I think he can very well post plenty of quarterback 1 weeks. Again, MFL 10s, we've mentioned them again and again. I'm just trying to compete with Sigmund here, but he can be that second quarterback for you that offers a high ceiling with these weapons, which are pretty tremendous.
They are. So as a quick parting note on that good Bears talk there, and of course Marcus Wilson goes out with re-breaking his foot this week. So Daniel Braverman maybe gets a chance there, and
that would be nice.
And behind Zach Miller, so I don't know if people caught this. Behind Zach Miller, first they signed Josh Hill to a 3-year, $7 million offer sheet that New Orleans matched. Then just last week, and I want to say hats off to Jermaine Gresham, because Jermaine Gresham stayed with Arizona for like a 1-year, $1 million deal. The Bears were offering him $12 million guaranteed on a 3 or 4-year deal. The Bears wanted Jermaine Gresham, and Gresham turned down $12 million guaranteed because he wanted to stay with a team with a chance to win a Super Bowl.
Who's the GM?
Pace? Ryan Pace?
Yeah. What's his reputation? Anybody know?
New. New after he cleaned house. Yeah, I'm sorry, Phil Emery. Yeah, it didn't work.
He might have a happy accident this year, with Zach Miller.
Saints. He came up through the Saints. Yeah. He came up through. He was a scout, and then director of professional scouting, player personnel, and he became their general manager.
Because I'd love to criticize him and say, well, or give him the benefit of the doubt and say, oh well, maybe they want a younger guy to get behind Miller, but when you try and sign Jermaine Gresham at that point and offer him the amount of money that
who they end up signing. One of your favorites, Matt. You know who they ended up signing after a tryout?
Who was that?
Tony Moyaki.
That's right. That happened today.
Oh,
yeah, he's back. He's back.
There we go.
And then I'll give you the last one. We're a little overtime here, but I got to give you the last one.
Together, man.
So who's set up right now? Who's set up right now behind Miller, but ahead of Moyaki, who's stitched up. The Bronk. Why don't you tell people about Bronk?
That's right.
Broniker.
Oh, yeah. Ben Broniker. So the good thing about Broniker is that he can win the ball in the air. He's got decent quickness. He's kind of a, how would I put it, like a Cameron Brate type. You could probably say he's a Cameron Brate type.
Are they both from Harvard? Am I remembering that correctly?
One's from Brown, one's from Harvard.
Brown. All these, just the Valve, all of these Ivy League football players, receiver, playing tight end anyway.
Yeah, but Broniker is a nice effort player as a blocker, but he's going to need to get a lot better in terms of running routes and being able to block at the line of scrimmage before they use him in anything other than maybe an H-back role or split from the line of scrimmage. So, I mean, he's an intriguing player, but it's more like how fast is he going to learn? And you probably want to project it 2 to 3 years from now.
Right.
So I agree with Matt. I don't understand I don't understand what's going on with the Bears that they don't like him as their tight end one. It's not like, I mean, he did most of his production in four or five games, and when you look at what he did in 4 or 5 games to be able to be the tight end 16 last year, and he's going off boards on ADP as tight end 17.
Right.
It's just like, what's going on? That's a little weird to me.
It is weird. Well, I mean, like Zach Miller again, former option quarterback, Nebraska, Omaha. I mean, I would say that the stock argument against Zach Miller as your flyer at tight end to take as your second tight end is that he was putting up those numbers when Alshon Jeffrey was hurt, and after that, he was competing with guys like Josh Bellamy and Mark Mariani and Eddie Royal, the ghost of Eddie Royal, for targets. So yeah, he's catching 5 passes, 6 passes, 7 passes a game, but there were no other. I mean. You have about a game and a half of Alshon Jeffrey, a banged-up Alshon Jeffrey, and nothing else.
It's a good point. It's certainly a good point.
And he tore up the Rams. Who doesn't tear up the Rams?
That's a good point.
Seahawks.
That's a great point, and we'll leave it on that point. And that's why it keeps us coming back, right? Is that there are no absolutes, except that we absolutely love all of you. Cecil will be back, I think maybe in 2 weeks. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next week. It might be me and just me talking to myself. That actually could be. I could do the Dr. Gene style. What's the show going to be like next week? I don't know. Me talking to
next
myself.
week we're good.
Oh, right, Waldman, you'll be here. So folks, tune in next week. And of course, Matt Harmon, you know him, NFL.com. You know him from his fabulous trip across the country that included a picture of General Snowshoe when he stayed at our wonderful home here. And, of course, from footballguys.com. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's a real joy, really, folks. It's a real joy to get to do this every week, and we get closer to the season more and more frequently. We're going to be doing this every Thursday night all the way through the season. We love you, and we love that you give us the chance to do this. And, of course, we all love the game of football. We love putting our knowledge to the test in fantasy football. Seeing what happens. We'll see what happens with you. We will be back next week. As always, stay classy.